Garrett Graff published a perceptive and alarming opinion piece in the Washington Post, warning that we haven't even begun to grasp how much damage the pandemic will do. He means, principally, economic damage, and he is not an optimist about what kind of economic wreckage the virus is going to leave in its wake. The idea that life will soon return to normal is a fantasy, Graff argues, and he has some horrific numbers to fall back on. Colleges and universities are likely to go broke from the loss of tuition and revenues. States and cities are running dry on revenue. The time has come, Graff concludes, for the enormous creativity and agility shown by President Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal of the 1930s. The New Deal's cure for the Great Depression, in the form of vastly increased federal spending and multitudes of jobs programs, underscores, Graff says, how large and long the U.S. government's present-day interventions might need to be. Graff is right to be worried about the economic plight of ordinary Americans. But is a New Deal, a New Deal, the right solution? Is today's economic crisis even the same thing as the Great Depression? The Great Depression, that began in October 1929, was a systemic collapse through every sector of the United States economy and the economies of most of the world's nations. This is far from what we are encountering today, though. Our economic crisis is serious, but it is concentrated overwhelmingly in one sector: leisure and hospitality. Moreover, the employment it has triggered is disproportionately centered in just 7 states. We are not, in other words, talking about a systemic collapse on the order of 1929. Federal revenue from income taxes stood at just over $1 billion in 1929. That figure dropped precipitously by 1933 to approximately 1/3 of its 1929 level, and only recovered by 1936 to a point 61% of what it had been 4 years before. In fact, personal income, as measured by the income tax revenue figures, did not begin to approach its 1929 levels until 1940, and the onset of World War II in Europe, when spending on war-related production began to soar. This arc downwards is reflected in the non-agricultural employment figures. Employment in these sectors in 1936 was still only 89% of what it had been in 1929, and never recovered to 1929 levels until 1940 and the movement to war-related production. There remain many unknowns in the murky atmosphere of this virus. But one answer will surely not lead us there, and that is to lock down individuals and businesses indefinitely, with the expectation that the expiration of their jobs and livelihoods can be made up by federal government largesse. The safest way back to normal is to normalize, but to do it as wisely and with as much attention to specific areas and needs as possible. As we look at this new economic crisis, we need to take the advice of an earlier president, facing an earlier and much more formidable crisis, Abraham Lincoln, in the Civil War. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew, Lincoln said. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country.